Hello, I'm Dennis Snelling, and I'm pleased to be hosting this profile and preview of The Natural, the film that is the next in the series for the State Theater. And tonight we'll be talking a little bit about the movie itself, the making of the movie, the casting, etc. Also, some of the differences between the movie and the novel, as well as some of the real-life inspirations for both the novel and the movie. The movie was directed by Barry Levinson, and this was a real departure for Levinson. As you can see, he directed mostly intimate character portrayals during his career, and this was more of a mythological story, a big story, and it was unusual for him. He was coming off Diner, which was the first movie, one of the trilogy of Baltimore stories that he told during his career, with Diner, then Tin Men, and finally Avalon. He actually cut his teeth doing comedy television writing, and then actually wrote with Mel Brooks, both silent movie as well as High Anxiety, before directing his first film. So this was actually his second film after Diner, and then he went on to do Tin Men and Avalon, as you can see here, and also stories like Bugsy, Good Morning Vietnam, and of course Rain Man, which is the movie that he's most associated with in terms of winning the Academy Award as Best Director, and also that winning Best Film. The film itself opened in May of 1984, had a box office of $48 million. It was very successful. It was in theaters for 33 weeks and garnered 4 Academy Award nominations, including Glenn Close for Best Actress, and then 3 other nominations that were really the reason that this film was successful. One was Randy Newman, who did the score, kind of a very much of an Aaron Copland type of score. He's part of a family that has 93 Academy Award nominations. He has 22 of those, including 2 wins. He has an Uncle Alfred who's had 45 nominations for musical scoring in films and won 9 Academy Awards, and another Uncle Lionel who has 11 nominations with 1 win. And he has a cousin Thomas who has 15 nominations without winning so far last year for the film 1917 that he did with Sam Mendes. Newman has been most known for his work with Pixar and Disney over the last few years, but has been scoring films since the 1970s. And this was his second big film he'd done after Ragtime in 1981. After Randy Newman, you go down to the bottom right corner is Caleb Deschanel. He's had 6 Academy Award nominations. This was his second nomination. He was coming off The Right Stuff, which had been his first nomination. Of course, his daughter Zoe is now a very successful actress, especially known for the TV series New Girl. And then on the lower left corner is one of the 3 nominees for this film for art direction, Angela P. Graham. This was his 4th nomination. He had won previously for Godfather Part 2. The other 2 were Mel Bourne and Bruce Weintraub. And really this film, a lot of its success, besides the star power of Robert Redford, is driven through the music of Randy Newman, which provides a lot of the dramatic moments in the picture and the accents to what's going on with the characters, as well as the cinematography, which with Caleb Deschanel using a lot of shadows and color tints and a lot of lighting, such as the halo effect that you see with Glenn Close when she stands up in the game, and some of the characters always lurking in the shadows. A lot of the cinematography and the art direction that you see drives the character even more than the dialogue and the story at some points, along with the music. So these were, to me, these 3 factors, the score, cinematography, and art direction, had a lot to do with the success of this film. They were able to attract a major cast for this picture. Of course, Robert Redford, doing his first film appearance in 3 years, came on. And then Glenn Close, of course, who we talked about, she plays Iris Gaines in this movie, although in the novel her name is actually Iris Lemon. We'll talk a little bit more about her when we get to discussing differences between the movie and the novel. Then next in line on the top is Robert Duvall, who was coming off his Academy Award-winning performance in Tender Mercies as a country music singer. Then on the far right, you see Darren McGavin and Kim Basinger. Darren McGavin was coming off his role as the father in A Christmas Story, the Gene Shepard written story that was adapted to film. And of course, it was not at all successful when it first came out of the box office. But of course, once it was taken by Turner Broadcasting, it became a cult favorite and still is to this day. Basinger was coming off Sean Connery's comeback as James Bond in Never Say Never Again. So all of these actors were really in demand at this time. Going across the bottom, Wilford Brimley, well-known character actor even today, and he had worked with Redford a couple of times previously. Next to him is Richard Farnsworth, who had been a long-time character actor, especially in Westerns, and had made his mark 3 or 4 years ago, becoming much more noticeable after a movie called The Gray Fox. Then Barbara Hershey, who plays the woman who shoots Roy Hobbs early in the film. She would go on to work with Barry Levinson later in the movie The Tin Men in a major role opposite Danny DeVito, playing his wife in that. And then the far right, Robert Prosky, who's playing the part owner of the New York Knights. And he was in Hill Street Blues at the time. So really top-notch cast. Robert Redford really worked on his swing. He tried to model it on Ted Williams. He actually wore number 9 in honor of Ted Williams in the film. And I've had the opportunity to interview quite a few baseball players over the years, and Robert Redford's swing in this, they really point to someone who really worked and looked like a ball player. He spent a lot of time seriously working on this and did an excellent job according to other ball players. And there were, one of the reasons that the action sequences ring pretty true is that they used a lot of minor league players or ex-major league players as extras. And so the quality of baseball, which prior to that time was always a complaint about baseball movies, that a lot of the quality of play was not up to snuff. Here it really is if you watch it, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the minor cast characters. If we start in the middle of the top, Ken Grassino was, he played pitcher Al Fowler, who was one of the players on the take at the end, and he was a minor leaguer for the St. Louis Cardinals. On the right, you see 2 shots, and this is a fairly famous shot of a ball player playing third base, looking the other way when a ball hits him right in the gut, and got quite a few laughs when it came out. That's actually an ex-major leaguer named Phil Mankowski. Going to the bottom right is one of my favorite character actors, Ralph Tabachin. He was at one time an engineer for the FAA. During the war, he had 2 Bronze Stars and 5 Purple Hearts, but he's best known actually as Barry Levinson's good luck charm. He was in every one of Barry Levinson's movies except one. This is actually from Diner. It's not from The Natural. And this is where he's complaining to Daniel Stern about how he just doesn't think color TV looks right. He doesn't think Bonanza looks as good, as realistic as it would in black and white. And it's a fairly famous scene that got a lot of laughs. And Ralph would have these scenes in all the movies. He has a scene in The Natural. You'll see him in the restaurant with Glenn Close talking to the owner of the restaurant. The bottom middle is Robert Rich III. He plays Ted Hobbs, who's Roy Hobbs' son, that shows up at the end. Robert Rich's father owned the Buffalo Bisons minor league team, which this film was mostly filmed in Buffalo. And so that's why he got on there. The bottom left is George Wilcox, the Bat Boy in the movie. He lived in Buffalo. Most of these extras and small parts came from people who lived in Buffalo, where the movie was filmed. And George was actually at a fruit stand, and they happened to see him, thought he had the right look. This is the only film he ever acted in, and he did a nice job as Bobby Savoy, the Bat Boy. And then in the top left, another Buffalo native, Mickey Traynor. He played Doc Dizzy, who was the motivational speaker for the team, who talked about how losing is a disease. And he actually was a CEO of a very successful accounting firm in Buffalo, and acted in a couple of other movies in small parts. and is kind of a throwback to the St. Louis Browns actually had a hypnotist that they brought in to try to turn the team around, and this was kind of a play on that. So some very interesting character actors in this. Next, I want to talk about, there were actually what inspired the shooting scene, both in the novel and, of course, in the movie. And there were actually two famous shootings of ball players. Both happened in Chicago, and both have pieces that were used in the novel and in the movie. And the first is Billy Jurges, who was shot by Violet Popovich, also known as Violet Valley. And the left, you see her as a teenager, and bottom left is Jurges at the time he was playing for the Cubs. The shooting happened at the hotel you see in the middle of the slide. It was the Hotel Carlos at that time. It's now the Sheffield. And she and Jurges had been dating and had a fallout. Largely, she blamed on Kai Kyler, who was Jurges' teammate, who was trying to break them up. He was trying to tell Jurges that she really wasn't good for him. She had had a pretty rough background, had run away from home several times, lived in foster home situations. Her father was abusive to her mother, and so she was already divorced at 18. She was 21 when this incident happened. Jurges was 24. And she finally decided that if she left behind a note that she was going to kill him and herself, basically said if I have to go, he has to go too. On the right, there is the court scene. Jurges is kind of to the right with a handkerchief kind of hiding his face. And ultimately, he declined to press charges. He was only out of the game for about 2 weeks. What happened is she pulled a gun on him, and he wrestled with her. They both ended up getting shot. He got shot in the rib, which probably saved his life, not being with the deflection. She was shot in the arm, and ultimately he wasn't seriously injured. He was about 2.5 weeks. He declined to press charges, and the judge finally, who was a Cubs fan, finally agreed and then said, then the case is dropped for lack of a prosecution, and I hope no more Cubs get shot. The one thing that this did lead to is one of the famous moments in baseball history, or one of the maybe famous moments in baseball history, certainly one of the mythological moments, and that's Babe Ruth's called shot. What happened was, after Jurges' injury, he did come back, as I said, after 2.5 weeks, but there was concern on whether he was pushing himself too much and whether he might relapse. He had to have some other procedures done. So they purchased a guy named Mark Koenig, who's there on pictured on the left. And Mark Koenig had been shortstop for the New York Yankees during their heyday in 1926, 27, and 28. And he had had some eye problems, though, and had dropped back to the minor leagues. So the Cubs, wanting to fortify their infield, in early August, they fired Rogers Hornsby, who wasn't liked by the team, and brought in Koenig to help add some depth to the infield. And Koenig, almost right off the bat, he had a walk-off home run that won a game for the Cubs that started a 14-game winning streak and sparked them to win the National League pennant and get into the World Series against the Yankees. But at the end, because he'd only played in 33 games, even though he hit .353 for the Cubs and won several games for them, they only voted him a partial World Series share, which the Yankees, who still had close ties to Koenig, were very upset about. And it caused a bunch of razzing between the benches that culminated in Ruth becoming furious in Game 3 and either pointing or not pointing to the stands, but hitting a home run, certainly after he signaled that strike 2 was only strike 2 and not strike 3. I did have the opportunity to interview Mark Koenig and asked him about it. And he said he thought Ruth may have pointed. I also talked to Frank Crissetti, who was there, and he said Ruth admitted afterwards that he didn't, but if the press wanted to think he did, he would. But anyway, it's interesting that the shooting of Billy Jurges was not only interesting in and of itself, but also that it led to one of the great moments still remembered today in baseball history. The other shooting, of course, happened in 1949. 17 years after the shooting of Billy Jurges. And this was Eddie Waitkus and the shooting by Ruth Ann Steinhagen. Waitkus had started out with the Cubs, and that's when Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who's pictured on the right, became infatuated with him. She was 17 at the time, saw him at a game in April 1947 at Wrigley Field, and basically fell in love with him. She had hundreds of pictures of him, would spread them out across the room, would have him as an imaginary person that she would talk to, and basically was, even though she was working at the time, but she was also seeing a psychiatrist. She was eventually diagnosed as schizophrenic. And what happened, she really snapped when he was traded to the Phillies in 1949. So the top left is him with the Phillies. The top left is when he was with the Cubs. And she kind of felt like he had abandoned her. And so he felt she finally felt that if she couldn't have him, no one could have him. And she went and checked into the Edgewater Beach Hotel in the room you see in the middle slide. This is the room where it happened. She brought a big paring knife with her and a gun and was going to stab him and then kill herself. She sent a note down saying, giving her name. They had never met. She did watch him she was at every Cubs game, home game when he was with the Cubs, and would wait and watch for him outside, and then said she would go trembling in the corner after seeing him. It was such an emotional impact to her. So she basically stalked him for a couple of years. So she went and sent a note to him. He was from Cambridge. He was actually accepted to Harvard, but decided not to go and play baseball instead. So he saw this note from someone who had a name similar to someone he went to high school with. She used a different name, who was from Cambridge, said, "I have something really important to tell you. It'd be good to tell you in person." So he goes up there, and before she could stab him, he got past her saying, "So what's the deal?" and sat down in the chair that you see in the far right corner. So she made him go over by the window and pulled a gun on him and shot him in the chest. He didn't know what hit him. He was down and became unconscious. Instead of killing herself, she ended up calling the front desk, and she decided not to kill herself and said that she had shot a ball player and had them come up, and that saved his life. And one thing that Eddie Waitkus talked about, how Ruth Steinhagen had just no expression on her face, and you can kind of see the picture on the right is right after her arrest, and you kind of see what he's talking about. He had a long road back. Ruth Steinhagen, meanwhile, was pictured several times in prison with pictures of Eddie Waitkus. These are posed pictures. Also a picture of her in the prison yard in heels, playing first base, Eddie's position. In the bottom, there's Eddie in a wheelchair while she's over at the far left. And she was found insane and sent to a mental institution where she would spend 3 years. Meanwhile, Eddie Waitkus was in the hospital for the better part of 2 months. Here's a picture of him there. And here you can see the scar in his back. He had to have 3 major operations and 4 other procedures. Waitkus ended up dying of cancer of the esophagus at age 53 in 1972. Ruth Steinhagen, after her 3 years in the insane asylum, went and lived with her parents, outlived both her parents and her sister, and died alone in the family home at the age of 88 in 2012. Eddie Waitkus, his reaction at the end of this was, he says, "What gets me through is that this is the only girl in the world who thought I was perfect, and now they say she's crazy." Well, Waitkus did make a comeback. The next year, he played every game of the Phillies in 1950, and they went to the World Series. So he made a comeback, but his life, he was never the same as far as trusting people. His own son said that he went from being a real extrovert to a person who was really paranoid about people, and that's kind of understandable. So those were the 2 incidents that kind of inspired the Harriet Byrd shooting of Roy Hobbs. That puts the 16-year gap in this movie. The shooting occurs in 1923, and the rest of the film occurs in 1939. Then we'll talk about the filming locations for The Natural. First is the Buffalo War Memorial Stadium, which was built in the 1930s, was there through the 1980s. And the left is as it appeared during the filming of the movie. On the right is as it appears what's left of it today. There's a facade on the outside, and then inside you see a youth baseball field. Some of the other areas on the left, going top to bottom, you see Robert Redford. This was again this is the first shot in the film, and kind of a use of shadows to portray mood and character that Caleb Deschanel used. And this is at the South Dayton Railroad station. At the bottom, you see, at the top, you see Redford posed there in the first shot of the film, and below that, you see the railroad station itself as it looks today. Then in the middle two shots, you see the Buffalo Railroad Terminal inside, and then as it appears today as it's been abandoned. And then on the right, there's a candy store that was also used as restaurant scenes, kind of a soda fountain type place. The top right is supposed to be in Chicago, but it's actually in Buffalo. And at the bottom, you see as it looks today in Buffalo. So those are some of the filming locations. In talking about the novel and the novelist, Bernard Malamud was the novelist who wrote The Natural. He wrote several other books, as you see here. The most prominent being the one in the middle called The Fixer, which won the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. The inspiration for this particular novel was Arthurian legends. There's a lot of stuff from the bat being forged from a lightning strike into a tree, and naming the bat Wonder Boy. Some of the names, like Pop Fisher is the manager. Some of the names are very Arthurian. Then there was T.S. Eliot's great poem, The Wasteland, was also part of what inspired the original novel. And then the teen, young adult novels of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the Frank Merriwell type stories where the player becomes a hero against all odds. But the idea was to turn this on its head and take these myths and put them in modern times, dealing with moral dilemmas that perhaps the weakness of character had these heroes fail more than succeed. So kind of turning that concept on its head. So taking these three things together was a lot of what went into the novel itself. There are events from the novel that are really inspired by four different ball players that you see most prominently. On the left, Babe Ruth, of course, in both the novel and the movie of the Whammer, who's definitely inspired by Ruth. But you also have Hobbs somewhat inspired by Ruth as a pitcher turning into a hitter, and then the Herculean feats that he performs. Then, of course, Ted Williams, and that comes out where Roy Hobbs talks about wanting to be the best that ever was, which is an exact quote of Ted Williams, who wanted people, when he went down the street, to point to him talking about hitting and say that there goes the best that ever was. Below Ted Williams, see Bob Feller. And Bob Feller was a country boy pitcher, and the early parts of the novel and the film are really taken from Bob Feller's life, where he worked out with his dad and became this pitcher who could throw balls through the side of barns, etc. And then on the right, Joe Jackson, the flawed superstar who took the money in the 1919 World Series. And so there's these events, everything from Babe Ruth's famous stomach ache that Roy Hobbs has in the novel. They kind of change it a little bit in the movie and having to do with a bullet, but it's more Roy Hobbs' appetites that do him in the novel. And so there's incidences from each one of these folks, and down to, with Joe Jackson, "Say it ain't so, Roy," which, of course, Joe Jackson had the kid who went up to him and said, "Say it isn't so, Joe," once the news of the 1919 World Series broke. I want to talk a little bit about other differences between the novel and the film. So in the top left, you see Iris Gaines, In the novel, she's Iris Lemon. And actually, in the novel, she stands up like this when Roy's in a slump. But it's the first time she's ever seen Roy Hobbs. And they meet after that. Versus in the film, they grew up together, and she'd actually had Roy's son. So that's a big difference in the film. And then it's a matter of, does he pick Memo Paris or does he pick Iris Lemon in the novel? On the top right, you see the judge, and the relationship between Roy and the judge different in the film in a couple of aspects. One, that Roy's more receptive to the judge. He's not really that sympathetic with Pop Fisher and the battle over who will own the team the next year. He does go and try to negotiate a higher salary with the judge. And then when the judge refuses, he goes to the press and tells them, which then they turn around and give Roy a big day and give him all of these prizes, which just infuriates the judge. And then he actually negotiates a price to throw the ultimate game, the playoff. He negotiates it up to $35,000 and actually takes the money. Then on the lower left, you see it's the relationship between Memo Paris and Roy Hobbs, quite different in the novel. Much of a colder relationship. She actually blames Roy for the death of Bump Bailey, who had been her boyfriend, and is very cold towards him, which actually just makes Roy desire her more. Versus in the film, where there's some conflict within Memo Paris, you feel, on whether she really cares about Roy or is just trying to entrap him, and where she's trying to entrap him at the same time, she does really care about him. You have that sense. And there's more of a emotional feeling there than there is in the novel. And then finally, the central character of Roy Hobbs is quite different. He's a flawed character driven by his own desires, his own weaknesses, his desire for fame, his desire for fortune, his appetites for women, food, etc., are what drive him more than any kind of redemption. And in this final scene, he, of course, is successful in the movie. In the film, he does decide to not throw the game, but at the same time, he ends up striking out. And he's distraught. He buries what's left of his Bat Wonder Boy and feels he's failed when actually, in a way, he's kind of redeemed himself through that failure because he did end up, he takes the money, tears it up, and throws it back at the judge, beats the judge up, etc. So a very different, flawed character in the novel. That being said, Bernard Malamud did see the movie and liked it. He was very favorable towards it and thought it legitimized him as a writer, as he put it to his daughter. So with that, we've talked quite a bit about The Natural. It's, I guess it's time to take a look and judge for yourself, and then look forward to seeing you here on August 20th when I'll be hosting a question and answer period, and look forward to seeing you then. So in the meantime, enjoy The Natural, and then we'll talk about it. Thanks.